a set of questions, a set of sentences. After each sentence, there is a question. What I want you to do is out loud so all of us can hear you. Everyone in the room answers the question. So the first sentence is, the girl broke the window on the porch. Broke what?
The window.
The tree in the front yard shaded the man who was smoking his pipe. Where? The hill was steep. What was?
The hill.
The cat, running from the barking dog, jumped on the table. From what? The tree was tall. Was what?
Tall.
The old car, excuse me, lost my place. Oh, the car pulled the trailer. Did what?
Pulled the trailer.
The old car climbed the hill. What did?
The old car.
The girl who lives next door broke the window on the porch. Lives where?
Next door.
The scared cat was running from the barking dog. What was?
Scared cat.
The girl lives next door. Who does?
The girl.
The tree shaded the man who was smoking his pipe. What did?
The tree.
The scared cat jumped on the table. What did?
The cat.
The girl who lives next door broke the large window. Broke what?
The large window.
The man was smoking his pipe. Who was?
The man.
We're getting close. Hang in there. The old car climbed the steep hill. The what?
Old car.
The large window was on the porch. Where?
On the porch.
The tall tree was in the front yard. What was?
The tall tree.
All right. Car pulling the trailer climbed the steep hill. Did what?
Climbed the steep hill.
The cat jumped on the table. Where?
On the table.
The tall tree in the front yard shaded the man. Did what?
Shaded the man.
The car pulling the trailer climbed the hill. Which car? Car pulling the trailer, good. The dog was barking. Was what?
Barking.
The window was large. What was?
The window.
Just a second here. Okay, here are a set of sentences. What I want you to do, and we'll do it with a show of hands, is to identify the sentences that you heard in the list of sentences I just read. So you just had a bunch of material. Presumably, you remember some of what you just heard. So how many people think they heard the first sentence, the car climbed the hill? Raise your hand. You can look around the room. Looks like about half of you think you heard that one. How many people think you heard the girl who lives next door broke the window? Most of you seem to think that one. The old man who was smoking his pipe climbed the steep hill. How many think you heard that one? There are a few people's hands went up, but you got them down pretty quick. The tree was in the front yard. 30%. The scared cat running from the barking dog jumped on the table. 60%. The window was on the porch. 15% maybe. The barking dog jumped on the old car in the front yard. We got a couple of people who endorsed that one. The cat was running from the dog. A few. The old car pulled the trailer. Half of you. And the tall tree in the front yard shaded the old car. A few. Okay, well, let me tell you, first of all, none of those were sentences you heard. Okay? And this illustrates something about memory. We don't remember exactly what we experienced. We put memories together with things we know. All of the ideas, except for those two sentences that were not ideas expressed in the initial set of sentences, all the other sentences contain ideas that were in the first set of sentences. And what we do when we remember, and actually what we do when we remember well, is we put ideas together. So when you think about learning in a class, relating new material coming in to things you already know, creates better memories that are more accessible so that you'll be able to recall that information later. Go back to the other. When we talk about memory, we talk about short-term and long-term memory. Short-term memory is now also sometimes called working memory. It is the information that you retain that you are currently aware of. So when information comes in, you put it into short-term memory. There's also information you're not currently aware of. So, for example, what is the capital of Texas? Austin, a bunch of people. You weren't thinking of that when I asked the question. You go out and access that information from long-term memory. The ease of getting information out of long-term memory depends on whether you've accessed it multiple times before. So I think it is in 6th grade, maybe you can correct me. In California, there's a time when you learn the capital of all the states. 6th grade? 4th grade? 5th grade, I'm sorry. Okay, so all of you, or almost all of you who went to school in California in 5th grade, learned the capitals of all the states. What's the capital of North Dakota?
Bismarck.
Bismarck. Few people have it. What's the capital of West Virginia?
Charlotte?
I don't know, so somebody's going to have to tell me. I haven't accessed it recently. Okay? So the point is, information in long-term memory primarily remains in long-term memory. And what happens over time is it's harder and harder to find it there. You could think of long-term memory as something like a set of file drawers. The more stuff you put in the file drawers, the more places you have to search through to find it. So there's an interesting feature about learning. Imagine we divide the class in two, and I have a set of flashcards. And to this half of the room, I tell you, you get to go through the flashcards 6 times and learn them. Okay? So you can look at one side, look at the other side. To this half of the room, I say, you get to go through the flashcards once, and then I will test you, but I won't tell you whether you're right or wrong. Then I will let you go through again, and I will test you. I won't tell you whether you're right or wrong. And I'll let you go through a 3rd time, and then I'll test you. So this half of the room got to go through 6 times. This half of the room got to go through 3 times and was tested 3 times. If I now test everybody, 7th trial, who's going to do better? Group that went through 6 times or the group that went through 3 times? 3 times does better. One of the things people who learn well do is they monitor what they know. So when we look at people using flashcards to learn things, the ones who use them effectively test themselves all the way along the way. So they'll look at one side, try and recall what the right answer is, and then turn it over to see if they're right. People who use flashcards ineffectively look at one side, look at the other side, look at the next card. The people who test themselves keep track of what they know and what they don't know. So after going through the deck a few times, imagine it was a foreign language vocabulary. The words you already know really well, you stop studying as much. Take those out of the deck and work on the ones you don't know the answer to. And that simple little test of looking at how people use flashcards predicts college GPA. That is, the people who are learning effective are ones who are testing themselves and monitoring what they're learning. That's an important part of how memory works. So last time, I talked to you about that little demonstration I did in my introductory psychology class, where I had the football player who came in and I attacked him, and everybody remembered that he had attacked me first. Okay. Everybody recall that from last time? That is an example of a broader phenomenon which is memory works by relating incoming memories to things you already know or you think you know. So in the case of eyewitness testimony, people relate eyewitnessing an event to things they know. This demonstration doesn't work so well in California because we're always exposed to people from a variety of different groups. But in many parts of the country, people's eyewitness testimony about members of their own racial group is much more accurate in just identifying who was there from a photo array than it is when they're identifying people from other groups. Because in less diverse parts of the country, people have less experience with individuals who are from a group different than their own. So it works well in Iowa, not so well in California. But another feature of eyewitness testimony is what people remember is influenced by information they're given after events. So a key study in demonstrating this phenomenon was a study where there was a video clip of an auto accident. And so after seeing the clip, one group of studies asked, how fast was the red car going when it crashed into the yellow car? Another group was asked, how fast was the yellow car going when it crashed into the red car? And the third group was asked, how fast were the 2 cars going when they had their accident? So the third form of question is neutral. The first one implies that it was the red car that did the crashing into. So if you then ask all 3 groups, who do you think was responsible for the accident? Now remember, they saw the same video clip. The group that was asked at an earlier point in time, how fast was the red car going when it crashed into the yellow car, report that the red car caused the accident. The group that asked how fast was the yellow car going when it crashed into the red car says the yellow car caused the accident. And the group that was asked neutrally reports about equally. Some said the red car, some said the yellow car, some actually said they couldn't decide. Okay? So we know what we think our memories of what happened are influenced by all kinds of things. What you think of as memories of what was said in a lecture are influenced by the context of the lecture and what you already know. And you may, if you will, pay more attention to some things than others, dependent on your preconceptions walking in. To succeed in college, you have to remember what those of us who are professors want you to know. So, there's going to be a diagnosis on your part of what is it a faculty member wants you to retain. Now, you may want to retain some other things too, but to succeed in the course, you want to retain what it is the professor wants you to retain. And that involves both paying attention, doing tests to see if you really learned it, doing repeated access. There are all these features of memory that help us. So let me give you a different illustration. Imagine that it's 30 years ago. The way you got a telephone number for somebody whose telephone you didn't know 30 years ago is you called directory assistance. So I want to call, I don't know, the chairman of physics, Michael Kaufman. So I call up directory assistance and I say, what is his telephone number? And they give me a 924, I don't know the rest of his phone number, but they give me 7 digits. And I dial the phone number. Actually, go back 50 years, I dialed the phone number. 30 years, I dialed the phone. And then I wait, and then I hear a busy signal. Is everybody with me in that sort of idea here? I don't know the phone number. When you're getting information and you're just going to use it immediately, and you don't have a reason to retain it long term, you don't move it from the short-term memory to long-term memory. So as soon as I finished dialing his phone number, I didn't need it anymore. It went away. On the other hand, now we got to go back about 48 years ago. I'm walking across campus and there's a really beautiful young undergraduate that I haven't met before, and I get to talking to her. She gives me her phone number, but I don't have a way to write it down. So I repeat it over to myself, try and store that away, because that's a phone number that I want later. Comes in the same way, the perceptual system, you hear the words, goes into short-term memory. It is attention and various mnemonic activities that move information from short-term memory to long-term memory. Can anybody in the room tell me the order of the planets from the planet closest to the sun out to Uranus? Used to be out to Pluto, but Pluto got demoted. Does anybody know them in order? Yeah.
Oh, you want me to say them? Or
Yeah.
All right. First is Mercury, Venus, and of course Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus.
And how do you remember that order?
Well, to be honest with you, I remember it from when I was a kid.
Okay, so you just have it memorized. Yes?
Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus.
And how do you remember it?
I remember this from this one TV show I kept on watching where they made this specific, like,
Okay, I'm fishing and I'm not catching anything. I'll try one more. Yeah, I don't need the order. That's a mnemonic strategy. Having a sentence where the first letter of each of the words in the sentences is the first letter of each of the planets. People that use those kinds of strategies all the time. And different strategies work better for some kinds of information than others. But it is useful for you to think about the kind of memory strategies you're using when you're trying to learn information. So you develop your own mnemonics to do various kinds of memory. Oh, one piece I didn't talk about off this slide. The first memory exercise I gave you, where you answered the questions about the sentences, and then I tested you about whether or not you remembered having heard any of the sentences. That's called an incidental memory task. It's incidental because I didn't tell you you had to memorize the sentences. What we assessed after the fact was how much did you remember given a set of experiences. Much of what we learn is incidental memory. That is, we're experiencing things in the world. We're not thinking about doing things to remember them. But it turns out that what you do when you're experiencing things influences how well you remember them. So one last task to talk to you about. Imagine I have a list of words that I'm going to read to you. I'm now going to divide you into 3 groups for my list of words. The group over here is going to count how many vowels there are in each of the words. So your task for each word is merely to determine the number of vowels. The group here is going to count how many syllables there are in each word. And the group over here is going to think of a word that means the opposite of whatever word I give you. So you think of antonyms. So imagine this as an experiment on memory. 3 different groups. After we're all done, I didn't tell you we're going to have to remember them. It's an incidental memory task. And I assess how many of the words you remember. You will remember the least. You will remember an intermediate amount. You had to pay attention to the sound pattern. You will remember the most. You had to pay attention to the meaning of the word in order to generate an antonym, a word that means the opposite. So how well you remember depends very much on what you do, and it doesn't depend very much on your intention to remember. You can motivate people grammatically, but if what they actually are asked to do is what we would call shallow processing for the group over here, very surface features of the information, versus deep processing over here, dealing with the meaning of the information, that's what predicts how well you will learn. Any questions about that? Okay. Next feature is talking about egocentrism and role-taking. Young kids are very egocentric. They think everybody thinks about the world.
No.
Michael, is there a battery anywhere? Okay, I'm going to shout for a little while. Young kids think everybody thinks about the world the way they do. Everybody experiences the world. Here's an illustration. Get a 4-year-old kid, we'll go with a 4-year-old boy, and he was asked picking a present for a friend of his, for his older sister, for his mother, and his teacher. That's the task. And we have a bunch of presents that he selected. There's There's a nice scarf. There's a book. Okay? So you imagine the baby. Thank you. Okay? From the point of view of the 4-year-old, to his friend he gives the red fire engine. To his sister he gives the red fire engine. To his mother he gives the red fire engine. And to his teacher he gives the red fire engine. Why? Because there's nothing more exciting among the group of objects of potential gift than that red fire engine. He would love it, so he presumes everybody else would love it. Another kind of example. I was in a bookstore, and a little 5-year-old girl put her fingers in her ears and then said, "Daddy, can you hear me?" And he says, "No." So she says louder, "Daddy, can you hear me?" Okay, notice 2 things here. First, her presumption, if she put her fingers in her ears, it influenced what he could hear. And secondly, she didn't use the clue back when he said no. The only way he could be answering her question is if, in fact, he had heard her. Okay? So this is characteristic of very young kids. We get better at role-taking as we get older. We don't get perfect at it. I remember maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago, getting a Barry Manilow album from my aunt for Christmas. I don't know how you feel about Barry Manilow, or if you even know who he is, and not a style of music I would ever spend any time listening to. Okay? Now my aunt did part way of role-taking. She knew I liked music. She was looking around for what was popular at the time, but she didn't know my taste. So it was an error, not of an error of forgetting to role-take, but an error of not knowing enough to be able to effectively role-take. So let me ask all of you a question. How do you know what to call your professor? I mean to his face. You may call him all kinds of things behind his back. How do you know? How do you know what to call your professor? Yes. Are you just stretching, or are you going to tell me how you know?
They'll tell you what they want to refer to you as.
I can't hear you. Yes.
By asking them what they want to be referred to as.
One way is the direct way, is to ask. Another way, look at how they put their name on the syllabus. If they put Dr., in my case, Dr. Cooper or Professor Cooper, probably I want pretty formal address to me. Or you can listen to what students who've been around longer call somebody there. So there are lots of different ways. That's a form of role-taking. If you violate something that somebody else holds as really important, that costs you in terms of their impression of you. So, for example, if Michael really goes out of his way to give you instructions about how to do an assignment and gives you a PowerPoint with an audio on how to do the assignment, and then you come up to the front of the class before the class starts today and you ask him, "Now, how are we supposed to do that assignment?" He probably, because he's a nice man, will just tell you how to do the assignment. But in his head, he's thinking, there's a student who didn't pay any attention, didn't make use of resources, so they're wasting my time rather than doing their job. Here's here's a hint to all of you. I'll tell you something. Never say to any of your instructors here, never say, I'm sorry I missed class today. Did you say anything important? You would not believe how frequently that sentence gets uttered on this campus. Whenever anybody asks me that, I say, no, I didn't say anything important today. We were just bullshitting the whole class. There's nothing for you to know. But think about all of your communications. Effective communication depends on effective role-taking. So when I lecture to a group like you that I don't know very well, one of my tasks is to try and figure out what do you know and what don't you know. To create a lecture, if I tell you things and they're only things you know, slowly everybody goes to sleep. If I presume you know things that you don't know, it's very much like, imagine you go to a physics course on quantum mechanics after this class today. Well, there may be a few of you who are well trained in physics, but if you don't have a lot of background in physics, you're not going to be able to understand a lecture in quantum mechanics. This skill of reading the situation, reading other people, is a crucial social skill. And it is a skill, as I said, kids are very bad at it, they get better over time, but there are individual differences in how well people are able to make inferences about other people they're interacting with. It is worthwhile thinking about assessing that in yourself, and if you find that you're weak at it, work on improving it. It's another part of using this developmental system that we all go through as human beings to become better and better at doing a whole variety of tasks in the world. So finally, let me ask you, do animals do role-taking? Yes. Why do you think yes? Somebody willing to be bolder and talk to the whole class? If you think yes, yeah, go ahead and shout it out.
When we see honeybees, there's a queen bee who just sits. There are worker bees who go out and get nectar from the flowers. That's role taking.
So the question is that behavior that's built in, that, if you will, genetically transmitted, or is that behavior that they use inferences about the other to do? See, if we look at higher mammals, the chimps, bonobos, and so on, it's pretty clear the higher mammals that live in groups learn to do at least a primitive level of role-taking. They can detect emotions in other animals so that they don't get hurt by annoying a bigger, stronger animal when he's pissed off. So there's good evidence that they have a kind of self-consciousness and consciousness that others have their own point of view in the, as I say, higher mammals. And in fact, they seem to develop it more quickly than human beings. That's probably because they mature more rapidly, so a whole bunch of things, including the developments in the brain that you heard about from Dr. Schneering, and so on, are happening more rapidly. But there are other kinds of examples, like some birds lie. They lie by giving the call that says a predator's coming, what do the other birds of that species do when they know a predator's coming? They flee for safety. And the bird steals nesting material and other things, okay? To be a good liar requires role taking. You have to figure out what the other person might believe and what they might not believe. Any of you know 3 or 4-year-olds? They lie all the time, and they do it very badly. You know when they're lying. By the time they get into middle school, they're much better at it, and it's much harder to tell. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about today is moral judgment. And I believe you did an exercise in your little sections on moral judgment. Is that correct? Yes. Somebody tell me what you did. Somebody who has a loud voice so other people can hear you. Yes, thank you.
We looked at letters and tried to find 4 or 5 of them. It's kind of like a... Oh, isn't that the one where we talk about where stealing was the medicine? Good or bad?
I'm sorry, what? We study moral judgment typically by giving dilemmas. I think the one you had was it the guy whose wife was dying of a disease? And he had some money, but the druggist wanted twice the amount of money that he had. And he didn't have that much money. And the question is, should he or should he not steal the drug? And why? Okay. These kinds of dilemmas are used to try and look at the way people reason about moral issues, not at the particular judgment they make. Okay? So whether you say yes or no to should steal the drug, the thing that is diagnostic and the thing that changes as people develop is the kind of reasoning they use. Okay? So the most primitive form of reasoning is kids think about what's the consequence to them. Okay. Why don't you hit your sister? Because if I hit my sister, my mother will spank me. Okay? It has nothing to do with whether it's right or wrong to hit the sister. The judgment is based on what the consequence of doing it might be. Okay? And the first one that young kids focus on is avoidance of punishment. Secondly, the other thing that comes in is, what do they want? Turns out kids become more assertive about what they want during the preschool age range. Okay? So they decide whether to do something or not based on what they think the consequence will be, that's the avoidance of punishment, and how much they want it. So in the case of the druggist, reasoning like the druggist shouldn't steal, he might get put in jail, or the husband, not the druggist. The husband shouldn't steal, he might get put in jail, so that's avoidance of punishment. Or the husband should steal because he wants his wife to be with him, and if he doesn't steal, she'll die and he won't have her anymore. So both of those are pre-moral ways of looking at the world. Okay. Starting in middle childhood, people start to develop a sense of what's called conventional morality. One form of conventional morality is the form where you do something based on the norms of the group. What will make people like you? So, all of us have done that at some point. The question is, do we think that's the way you ought to make decisions about what you do or not? But in Larry Kohlberg's system, that was the third stage. He watched how reasoning changed as people grew older, and that good boy, nice girl, doing what people expect you to do is the third stage in his system. So, in the case of our dilemma, somebody might say, well, all his friends would expect him to steal the drug for his wife. That's what the norms of the group are, so he ought to steal it. Okay? The stage after that is, no, it's illegal. And you shouldn't do things that are illegal. That's against the law. There are rules, and you shouldn't violate the rules. Have any of you ever worked in a summer camp for kids in middle childhood? A few of you. Here's an interesting thing that happens when you get kids who don't normally play together coming to a summer camp. I've seen it most in boys around age 10 to 12. So they come to summer camp, and you're going to play a game. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be capture the flag. One of those informal games that you can play with lots of kids. And the kids discover that their rules for this game differ somewhat. Could be capture the flag, could be kick the can. Okay? And for them, at age 10 to 12, the rules aren't simply a social convention that makes playing the game possible. The rules have a morality in the rules. I know the right rules, my dad taught me, and we have to play by my rules. And it's hard at the very beginning of a session of summer camp to get kids to agree on a set of rules as a social convention, because they think you have to behave according to the rules they learned. It's a real rigidity. So as I say, that's part of conventional morality. We all drive 55 because that's the law in California, right? Nobody laughed. Who drives 55 at a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit? Raise your hand. We have a couple of people out there. I believe the column in the Mercury News refers to you as road boulders, blocking the people wanting to go faster. Okay? But the next stage, this post-conventional morality, has to do with looking at how the whole social system works. If the speed limit is 55 and conventionally people go a little over 55, that's not a problem. But if the speed limit is 55 and there are people driving down the road at 110, that's a problem for the whole system. So thinking about the consequence of violating a rule, sometimes you may violate a rule because it leads to a higher moral good. So that could be an argument for stealing the drug, even though it's against the law. In this case, because the druggist won't be reasonable, it's more important to save a life than to obey the law, making those kinds of comparative judgments. And this is the kind of thinking about moral issues that when people stop to do it is much more common among college students. Sometimes we behave reflexively, both college students and professors. But if you get college students to slow down, think about why would it really be right or wrong, this is the level of morality that many college students express most frequently. The last stage is one that we rarely see. So here are the kinds of dilemmas that reveal the last stage. Imagine you're on a lifeboat. There are 5 people on the lifeboat. You know how far it is to get to somewhere where you can get more food and water, And you realize if all 5 people keep consuming the food and water, you're all going to die. On the other hand, if one person would volunteer to commit suicide, the food supply now has gone up, the consumption rate has gone down, and the other 4 will make it to land. So you have a discussion among yourselves, and 4 of the 5 people agree to draw straws, and whoever gets the short straw dies. But the 5th person won't agree. Okay? What do you do? What? Well, you don't want to throw him off the boat. You kill him and keep him for the food. Remember? Food supply is short. Okay? When ethicists talk about, ethicists are people who study what is the moral thing to do under a lot of different circumstances. They argue you can't force the one who won't do it by agreeing on their own to participate. And so the other 4 people have to draw from 4 straws, and one of them dies, and the guy who wouldn't participate ends up living. So you can think about that as whether you think that's the moral thing to do. And I leave you there. Have a good afternoon.